Hello everybody and welcome to the Office 365 Lab series. As you may know, this is the second webcast from a whole series that spans across the month of September, and today we will concentrate on Azure AD Connect, and hopefully right after this webcast we will be able to say that we all are Azure AD Connect masters. What are we going to discuss today? Of course, a lot of topics and interesting things regarding Azure AD Connect, how users and in general objects are synchronized from your local Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. We will look into synchronization rules and a lot of other very interesting things. But before we get started, let me briefly introduce myself for those of you who are not present in the previous webcast. My name is Dan and I am a partner technical consultant with Microsoft for around 4 years. My main focus is on cloud identity topics, so everything regarding Azure AD, Azure AD Connect, ADFS, Azure SaaS applications, and so on. So this is my really big focus. However, I also do a lot of consultant work in Exchange Online and also in other topics regarding to specific cloud services, like for example Microsoft Intune or Microsoft Azure Infrastructure as a Service. But today, as we said, I will concentrate on Azure AD Connect and we will look into it. A brief agenda for today. As we see, or as I already told you, we'll concentrate on how Azure AD Connect is doing the work, how things are getting synchronized from your local Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. We will look into filtering options. We have organizational unit-based filtering or attribute-based filtering, and this is also the point where we will introduce in discussion the concept of the synchronization rules editor that we have in Azure AD Connect, and we will do everything as you already saw in the last webcast, only using live demos. So during this webcast you won't see any other slides besides these three introductive slides, and really at the end I also have three other slides that conclude and wrap up in a certain way this session. So before we talk longer, I would say we should get started. So what I will do, I will present my desktop right away so that we can start looking into Azure AD Connect. So now I'm presenting. It should be fine just in a few seconds. I would like to wait. Yes, now I think that my screen should be available, and you already can see here, maybe this is already familiar to you, this is basically Azure AD Connect. If you worked previously with FIM, for example, or nowadays with MIM, Microsoft Identity Manager, you notice that this type of interface from the MIIS client.exe, how it's called, is very familiar. And this is practically because Azure AD Connect is built on top of the same synchronization engine that we used in FIM or in the newer MIM. So that's why this interface is really the same, and also this is the reason why the way that objects are synchronized from local Active Directory to Azure Active Directory is really similar as architecture with what we know from the FIM. But let's take a look into this interface. As we can see here, things are fairly easy because we have two different connectors. We have a connector that is responsible for synchronizing from our local Active Directory, and we have a connector that is responsible for the relationship between the Azure AD Connect server and Azure Active Directory. So normally this is why when we run a synchronization, we will see several synchronization tasks that we would normally call run profiles that execute in each of these type of connectors. And if we can take a look at the synchronization process, basically the last synchronization process started here and ended here. So what we see is basically that we have 6 different synchronization tasks, or how they are technically called run profiles. Let's take briefly a look into what each task does here. So first of all, when you run a synchronization, the first task to perform is the normal or the local AD connector is importing data from the local Active Directory. So if you have a new user, if you have some attributes that have changed for a certain user or group or contact and so on, during this first run profile, all this information will be imported to Azure AD Connect. Now, exactly the same thing is done also by the connector that is responsible for the relationship with Azure AD Connect. So this connector also, as a second task or run profile, imports all the data that we have available in Azure AD already. And let's break it up here a little bit, because I want to tell you a little bit about the Metaverse database. Here we have the search option, but what I wanted to explain to you is the key concept of this type of big database that is behind Azure AD Connect. So you have to think of Azure AD Connect as a bigger database where we synchronize, we import information from both sources, we import this information into the database of Azure AD Connect. Then we compare these two different information sets. And if we see, for example, that within the information that we received from the local Active Directory, there is something new, there is a new value for a certain attribute, or there is a new user, this new information will be also exported to Azure Active Directory. So this is why when we synchronize, we have first this type of import processes. So we import first from the local Active Directory and from Azure Active Directory. Then we have the second process, basically again performed on each of these two connectors. And this is the so-called synchronization. So this is the step where we compare these two different information sets that we received from the import from the local directory and from the import from the Azure Active Directory, and we'll check exactly, okay, what new attributes do we have? Do we have new users and so on? And after Azure AD Connect does this type of comparison, the last and final step is to export the new data to the respective source. And we have an export operation on the Azure AD connector, and this export run profile will export all the new changes to Azure Active Directory. And then we have also an export run profile on the local Active Directory connector, but usually we do not, or we never synchronize or export data into Active Directory. The only exception where some type of export from Azure AD Connect to the local Active Directory occurs is when we have Exchange Hybrid. Because in Exchange Hybrid, we need certain attributes to be consistent among the two organizations in order for all hybrid capabilities to work correctly. So that's why in case of Exchange Hybrid, there is a set of limited attributes that if we change in some way on Office 365 side, those changes will be also synchronized back into our local Active Directory. But unless we have an Exchange Hybrid, we never export any data from Azure AD Connect to the local Active Directory. So this is the basic process that takes place every time we run a synchronization. Now, regarding synchronization intervals and how a synchronization is performed, let's do a clear screen first to have everything clear here. Get AD Sync Scheduler. This is a very important commandlet, because what this commandlet shows us, it shows us how Azure AD Connect is configured to work. And if we look here, we see that, for example, we have a synchronization interval of 30 minutes. So this means that every half an hour Azure AD Connect will perform a synchronization. And we see the synchronization type for the next synchronization that is scheduled. And this will be delta synchronization. And I will look, or we will discuss these concepts of delta synchronization and full synchronization or initial synchronization towards the end of this webcast, because it's also a topic that is very interesting and also very useful, especially when we want to set up organizational units based filtering. And then we also see at around what time should the next synchronization take place, and so on. Now, if you, let's say, worked with Azure AD Connect, or the former DearSync, as it was called right at the start of the brief history of this tool, you know that back in those times, the tool synchronized basically every 3 hours. So if a synchronization took place now, we would have to wait another 3 hours until the next synchronization would trigger. Of course, we also had in those versions also some options in order to start and run a synchronization. However, based on feedback, we also decreased the synchronization interval. And now when you deploy Azure AD Connect for the first time, the default synchronization interval is 30 minutes. However, if you want, we can also change the synchronization interval to be 1 hour or 45 minutes and so on. Theoretically, you could also let's say, customize this interval to be less than 30 minutes, but very important, it is not supported from our side or from Microsoft to set here a value that is lower than half an hour. And this is basically hard-coded here, because this allowed sync cycle interval a value indicates the, let's say, the synchronization interval time span that is default supported. So we do not support under half an hour. We do, however, support to set the customizing the synchronization cycle interval to more than half an hour. So what we will do right now, let's see how we can do that. So of course, if we ran get AD sync scheduler, when we want to set something is, of course, set AD sync scheduler. And here we have to use this value, customized sync cycle interval. Sync cycle interval. And we need to use exactly this format when we define exactly what we want to synchronize. And I want, let's say, an interval to be 1 hour. So we'll put here 0, 1, 0, 0, and so 1 hour, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. So in this case, I will set this sync cycle interval to be right now at 1 hour. However, very important thing to notice here, if we run again a get AD sync scheduler, we will see that, however, the next sync the current effective sync cycle interval is still 30 minutes. The reason is very simple. When a synchronization cycle completes, then the tool already hard codes exactly when the next synchronization cycle will take place. And that's why we have here still 30 minutes, because it was set to 30 minutes when the last synchronization finished. But if we run, for example, right now synchronization, and this is the next step, this is how we run a synchronization with start AD sync cycle and policy type delta. We'll do delta synchronization right now. And if we wait just a little bit for this synchronization to finalize, let's go back to here. we see that this is already in progress. As I told you, we had already the Delta import from local AD. Now we are performing the Delta import from Azure AD. Then the next step will be to run a synchronization on the local AD connector, then to run a synchronization on the Azure AD connector, and then we start the export. So first we export on Azure AD, and then we have the final operation, the export to local AD, which, as I told you, normally, unless you have hybrid, won't never or will never synchronize any data to your Active Directory. And since we didn't do any change to any user object in our local Active Directory, of course that for now we don't have any new user synchronized or added to Azure AD, although we surely have here an error that we will look in a few minutes from now, because we'll check exactly what this error is and how can we resolve this type of errors, because in my experience these type of errors are very common in basically a lot of infrastructures. But now we ran a synchronization, and what I wanted to show you is right now we run again get AD syncs scheduler, and we will see that right now is 1 hour. So this means that right now I don't know exactly what the time is, because this is a server that I have hosted in Azure. However, in 1 hour from now, Azure AD Connect will run again a new synchronization cycle. So this is how we can change this customized sync cycle interval in order to suit our needs. However, once again, I want to say, please do not set this attribute to a value that is lower than 30 minutes, because this is not supported by Microsoft. You can set it to any value that is higher than half an hour, but not lower. So this is very important. Good. This is how synchronization works. We have seen how we can start a synchronization using PowerShell, and right now this is, let's say, the only or the best way to start a synchronization, because we could run also the synchronization from the MIS client, but in order to do that, you would have exactly to know the order of all processes and to run every run profile separately. So that's why it's best practice that if you need to start a synchronization and don't want to wait until the next synchronization will occur, then you can use this type of commandlet with start AD sync cycle and policy type delta or initial in order to start a synchronization. But let's go now back to the synchronization engine, because we have seen here that we have an error message, and this is very important. We do not want to see errors that we have in Azure AD Connect. So if we check this error information, we can see, for example, that this user is affected, which has also this type of user principal name. Now, in the export error, we don't see a lot of great detail about what the problem might be, but we have a detail button here, and this gives us a fairly detailed explanation of what's happening. And here this error tells me that Azure AD Connect is not able to update this type of object, and he also gives me a reason because this object, and it says that it might have values that might already be associated with another object in the local Active Directory. And it gives me also the attribute that is conflicting. And this is, for example, this secondary proxy address that is contact at dampatrasco.com. And this is very important, because now we know exactly, there is a problem with duplicate attributes. And why is this error so common? Because I have seen it a lot of times. It's fairly easy, because in Active Directory, this is a normal or let's say Active Directory is domain services, and there you can add users, and those users can have also duplicate attributes. However, in Azure AD, we are not allowed to have duplicate attributes. So in that case, and this happens a lot with secondary SMTP addresses that admins add to users without always knowing exactly why they add different SMTP addresses, and then when they introduce Azure AD Connect, they get this type of error. However, it is very easy to find exactly out what the problem is, and we can fix it also very, very quick, because in this error message we receive exactly the problem. So we know exactly that this proxy address is for sure there for two different users, or for one user and one contact, or something like that. So what we need to do in this case, it's fairly easy. I would close this information for now, and I will switch to my domain controller. And here on my domain controller, I will go on find. And here you can perform an LDAP search in order to see exactly what are the user objects that contain this proxy address. So we will choose here custom search, and we will go on advanced. And here we can write down an LDAP query, very, very simple one, which is proxy addresses equals, and what do we have there? It's exactly the proxy address that is present in the Azure AD Connect error, and it should be something like that. And if we hit find now, I see here, for example, that I have two different users that surely have the same duplicate proxy address. So here, as in Azure AD, we are not allowed to have duplicate proxy addresses. The resolution here is fairly simple. We have to delete this proxy address from either one of these two objects that have this proxy address in common. So what I will do, I will simply go to this user here, and I should also, now I see here that the attribute editor is missing, but I see the user is James Harden. So if you are NBA fans, I think you know exactly who this James Harden should be. Let's go back here and check for that user. It's here. And if you go to attributes editor, I already filtered to display only attributes that have a value. And we can see here proxy addresses, and yes, there is this contact@dampasashko.com. So I will hit remove and apply. And just to make sure we are on the same page, I also go to Anthony Davis. And if you are NBA fans, I'm sure you also know this guy very good. Again, let's go to proxy addresses, and we can see that also this user has the same proxy address. But since I have deleted this value from the other user, I will let this proxy address for this user here. So what I would have to do right now is to go back to Azure AD Connect and run again a synchronization. So I will run again a delta synchronization, because this time the user will fall into the scope of this synchronization, and I promise you we will come to what a delta synchronization is and what an initial synchronization is later towards the end of this webcast. Okay, let's then switch back to the MIS client and wait for things to go smooth here. So we would be able, this was the delta import. Here we have an update because we deleted this proxy address from James Harden. We have here updates and also delta import from here, and delta synchronization. And on the export now, we should be able to see also the user James Harden exported to Azure AD Connect. Or I don't recall exactly if Anthony Davis was already added or not. But in this case, you can see that this time there is no error message. So in this case, this user was synchronized correctly. And let's check it. Get MSOL user principal name, James. This was the user principal name that I gave to this user. Okay, user not found. Maybe this is not refreshed so far. Let's run another synchronization and see what happens. But normally now this user should be synchronized. No, it's still not synchronized. Maybe this user is not correct. Let me check again in my domain controller what the exact user principal name is for this user. And let's go under attribute editor. It's Harden. Okay, it's Harden, not James. So yeah, let's run it again, but this time with Harden. And yes, this user is synchronized. Of course, this user does not have a license, but the user is now there. We can assign a license to this user. If you want to assign a license using PowerShell, then please check our previous Office 365 Labs webcast. You might find it also on our YouTube channel, and there we explained, I would say, in a very detailed way how you can assign licenses with PowerShell for different users. However, good thing is that we have resolved our problem. Synchronization or Azure AD Connect is not showing any error message, and we are good to go right now. The user can be productive right now. Good, and that's how we could resolve this error. Let's go to another very interesting topic, and this is filtering. So in Azure AD Connect, we have basically 3 ways to implement filtering. We have first organizational units based filtering, so that we define exactly, for example, that certain OUs get synchronized, but other OUs don't get synchronized. So this is one way to do it. The other way is to use the so-called domain-based filtering. When we defined a certain domain or subdomain from a forest that should be synchronized, and in that case we will synchronize only that one. And the third way to implement filtering is simply to use attribute-based filtering, and I can tell you that the most common options that are used in companies are the OU-based filtering and the attribute-based filtering, because in this way, let's say you let your options open, for example, to bring new OUs into the synchronization scope, or to bring new users into the synchronization scope without the need to perform any configuration changes on Azure AD Connect. So we will get a little bit deeper into these two type of filtering options. And the first one that I want to show you is how you do an organizational unit based filtering. And we perform this type of filtering always on the local Active Directory connector in Azure AD Connect. So we right click it and we go on properties, and then we have configured directory partitions. And here we hit containers, and we have to provide an enterprise admin, which I will do right now, and hopefully I don't mistype my password. And yes, what we see here is basically that we can choose very easily, and by checking a box, which exact organizational units or which containers do we want to synchronize and which not. And for example, we have seen we can see that I have already synchronized or that I have defined that only users that belong to this OU should be synchronized to Azure AD, but not the users that belong to this specific organizational unit. So it's really as easy as that. You simply have to go there and check some boxes or uncheck some boxes if you want to take users out from the synchronization scope, and then simply click OK, and that's basically it. However, maybe we don't wait until the end, and we could use, for example, this specific scenario in order to explain the difference between the different synchronization types. So delta synchronization and full synchronization, or initial synchronization. So first of all, pure theoretically, every synchronization, so, or let's take it from the start. Right after you configured Azure AD Connect and run the first synchronization, this type of synchronization will always be a full synchronization, and that's why it is also called initial synchronization, because it's the type of synchronization that runs the first time. What the synchronization makes, as we have seen, and I think I will go back to these operators, is basically it would import all the information from your local Active Directory to be processed by Azure AD Connect, and then of course to be synchronized to Azure AD. Now, after this initial sync, all subsequent synchronization cycles are delta synchronizations. And this means that we have a very, very clear synchronization scope. And for a delta synchronization, only users are in scope that have changed from the last synchronization. So if we then, if we go, for example, right now to these connectors, and we will configure again OU based filtering, and we will include also the other OU in the filtering scope, and password, yeah. Okay, should be good. So let's take also this other OU in scope. And the next synchronization would be, of course, delta synchronization. What you will see is that after we run the synchronization, let me also show you that I also have 4 users here. And what we will see is that these 4 users, I think this one we could know exactly when it's synchronized or not. And those users, okay, I took this OU in the synchronization, but those user objects have not changed. So these objects won't be in scope for this synchronization type, because it's delta synchronization, and it will synchronize only users and objects that have changed from the last synchronization. So in this case, the user objects itself, and we can see already in import, we don't have anything, because those users in the other OU have not changed, and therefore those users are not in scope for delta synchronization. But now instead, for example, let's take this user and attributes editor. Let me, I don't know, or maybe let's add an email. Right now, we after we add this information to this user, the user object has changed in the local Active Directory, and therefore, right now, if we run another delta synchronization, then this user will be in scope for the next synchronization, and we will see that in this case, only this user will be synchronized to Azure Active Directory. So let's wait a little bit. Okay, it's import. You can see already under ads on the import process, we have this user, because this user has changed, something has changed for that user, and therefore this user is in scope to be exported to Azure AD, but only this user from all the others will be synchronized, because only this user has changed. So let's wait until also this run profile finishes. and we can see exactly that this one was added. Yes, here we can see here under ads that this user was now added to Azure Active Directory. Okay, good. Now, in order to resolve this type of issue, the best thing is after you implement organizational unit-based filtering, sorry, not here, is to run a full synchronization or a so-called initial synchronization. Because if we run an initial synchronization, all users and all objects in our Active Directory are in the scope for the synchronization. Not only the users that have changed from the last synchronization, but all users in our Active Directory. So if we run now an initial sync, we will see that also the other 3 users there were in that OU will be synchronized to Azure Active Directory. So let's wait a few seconds. Okay, we can see full import and we have adds 3. So this means that these are exactly the 3 users that we had left in that specific organizational unit. And now also this other import is in progress. Few more seconds and we will see that on the export, all these new 3 users will be synchronized to Azure AD. So just as a conclusion, delta synchronization means that only users are in scope for that synchronization that have changed something in Active Directory from the last synchronization. All users that haven't changed in Active Directory will not be in scope for a delta synchronization. And this is why when we perform or when we implement an organizational unit-based filtering, the best way to make sure that all users are correctly synchronized as we expected to run a full synchronization. So an initial synchronization, unless we want to get to to open each user separately and add a certain attribute to that users, and if we do this, that user will also be in scope for a delta synchronization. But yeah, once again to check here exactly, yes, these are clearly the users that that were in that OU. So yes, now we have seen exactly how we can perform also this type of synchronization and what is the difference between delta synchronization and full synchronization or initial synchronization. Good. Now that's it with this topic, and therefore I would like to go one step further. And since we are discussing about filtering, and we will have to make the transition to attributes-based filtering, we also have to talk about the synchronization rules editor, because in the let's say starting with the version released in February 2016, this is basically the place where you implement this type of filters, of attribute-based filters. And in synchronization rule editor, we will see that we have 2 types of rules: inbound rules and outbound rules. Now, inbound rules, as you may expect, are always applied. One second. So inbound rules are always applied to import processes because it means inbound to Azure AD Connect. So the import from an external source, it could be the local Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, to Azure AD Connect. So here are the inbound rules applied. And then we have the outbound rules that are basically applied on the run profiles that export data. And in our case, since we do not have a hybrid, it is applied only to the export to Azure AD Connect. Are applied to the export to Azure AD. Now, if we think about attribute-based filterings, we have basically two kind of things that we would have to take into consideration. One is, for example, a proper filtering. For example, when we defined that a certain user that has a certain attribute value set to, let's say, no sync, should not be synchronized to Azure Active Directory. And this type of rule is here in order to filter. However, there is also another type of kind of filtering that, for example, defines some circumstances in which, for instance, we map the user principal name in Azure Active Directory from the email address attribute that we have in our local Active Directory. And this type of scenario is often used, for example, when we want to implement alternate login ID to Office 365 or to Azure AD, because organizations often have on premises in local AD user principal names that end in non-routable domain suffixes like domain.local, for example, and those UPNs can't be synchronized to Azure AD. So in that case, we choose to transform the local AD email address as a user principal name in Azure AD, and this is known as a transformation rule. Now, the best practice is that we always apply filtering rules on the inbound side, and we always apply transformation rules on the outbound synchronization rules. And this is very, very important to notice, especially, for example, if you have environments where you synchronize different local Active Directory forests to the same Azure AD. Because in that case, you may want also to do some things in between to check that if the users are unique and so on. Or you may have, for instance, a scenario where you have a user forest and a resource forest, and in that case, for example, we also import users from the resource forest. We import the users which are disabled users from the resource forest. Then we check these two type of information. We merge this information together, and when we export only one user object that has both the attributes of the user and the attributes of the user which is disabled in the resource forest. So this was kind of, let's say, a kind of an off topic for today's webcast or for what we have prepared, but it's very important. Please notice this best practice. Please apply this type of filtering rules in the inbound synchronization rules, and always apply transformation rules in the inbound section. And we will see right away how these type of rules are applied and how you can create this type of rule. But before we enter into the exact attribute filtering that we will see briefly, I would also like to go first in a problem that might come up very, very often, especially or in environments where you don't have an Exchange hybrid. And let's take a look, for example, at this user. And if we go to Attributes Editor, we can see here that we have this attribute MSEXCH hidden from address list set to true. So once this user is synchronized, and this user was synchronized, we would expect that this user should not be visible in the global address list in Exchange Online. However, if I go here and type a new email and search for this user, I would find him. So, oops, there is a big problem, and I really see this case very, very often. And I would like to briefly show you how you can resolve this. But first, let's discard this email and go back to our servers, and we need this here. Now you have to know that basically this type of attribute is listed under the let's go on inbound, because it's an inbound rule. And we see here different user join. So these are the circumstances when a user should be joined. And then in from AAD again, user join, group join, and we need to have here also a user. Okay, group join, group exchange, contact join, user join. Okay. Okay, now it should be visible. So we have here user exchange, and this rule is applied, for example, if we have an exchange hybrid. But we also have a user common in from AD that is applied when we do not have an exchange hybrid. And the problem here is that we will see we will need to edit this rule. However, this is very important. If you are in a production environment, do not edit this rule. Right when you click on edit, you have here the option. If you click on yes, you will create a rule that takes this specific rule as a template. However, please do that because these are the default synchronization rules that are present when you install Azure AD Connect, and do not change them. However, in order to test this and to make this quicker, I will click no, and in this case I will open for editing purposes the rule itself, and I will go right away to transformations. And here we have a list of all attributes that are in scope for this type of user objects. And if we check in this list, we can see that there is no attribute that is called MS exchange hidden from address list. So what we can do here is simply we will add a transformation rule. I think we added two, but one of them will remove. And we have here, no, not expression, it would be direct. And here we have a list of all attributes that are present both in Azure AD and in our local Active Directory. Here this is specific for Active Directory, and we have to look here, MS Exchange hidden from address lists, and in the source we have also to choose the same attribute because they have to be synchronized with the same value. Just give me a few seconds to find it. Okay, archive, okay. Here it should be, this is it. And we added this attribute to this list, and we will simply click on save right now. Remember, if you do this in production environment, please use this rule, and when you open it for edit, choose here yes in order to create a really new rule and not to do and don't do any change to this rule itself. But in order to test this, you can do it like this because it takes less time, and I will click cancel right here. Good. Let's now, because again the user has not changed. Okay, this is the wrong PowerShell. We need the PowerShell from the Azure AD Connect server, so we'll find it here. We'll run again because the user itself, again in Azure AD, hasn't changed anything for that user. So in this case, we need again to perform an initial synchronization to make sure that this user is again in scope and is again evaluated also against the transformation rule that we added a few seconds back. And let's check exactly what happens here. Again, the full import on both sides, and then the full synchronization we have here. And then on the export, we should see only one user. And we can see that only that attribute MS Exchange hidden from address lists should be now also added to Azure AD. Let's wait a few more seconds in order to have everything ready, and then Okay, these 3 users were updated. Probably also the users from the group that we had. Okay, this was not the one. Let's check again. This is the one. And we can see here for this user that the attribute, where is it? MX exchange hidden from address list, old value was null because there was no old value in Azure AD, and the new value is true. So right now this information has also synchronized to Azure Active Directory, and if we go right now to check, of course there might be some caching issues with the browser, but hopefully this user should not show right now. So basically, in this case, we resolve this issue that occurs very often when we do not have a hybrid environment and we set that attribute to true. It won't get synchronized unless we create a new rule or we add this transformation rule to in from AD user common in order to also take this attribute MS Exchange hidden from address list into the transformations for that specific user objects. Good. So now we resolved that issue. The second thing that I wanted to show you regarding synchronization rules editor is how can we filter users that have certain attributes, and that's why I would like to create a new rule here, and we will name this rule in from AD because we want to apply it to incoming objects from our local Active Directory, and we will name it no sync. And in description, we briefly write something that we know exactly what this rule does. And users with extension attribute 15 value set to no sync should not get synced easily. Now, connected system, as I told you, we want to apply this to user objects that are imported from our local Active Directory. So we choose the local Active Directory connector. Then the metaverse object is person. And the connected system object, the connected system is our local Active Directory. So in local Active Directory, this is a user. So you can see here, this is maybe a very important information. What we have as a user object in our local Active Directory in the metaverse database is known as a person. So very, very, very important. Now here, a link time will click join, because what's the difference? Provision will simply create this user again. Join will update the user if this type of user already exists. So we will make a join because the provision was already done or is done through the default rules that we have when we configure Azure AD Connect. And here the priority is very important. We will set here a values of 501, so 501. Very important here, the rules that have a lower value here are basically processed first. So it's something similar like the MX records in Exchange, for example. Because if you have an MX record set to 0 and an MX record set to 1, the MX record that will have always precedence will be that one with 0. So also in this case, we see that all default rules are created with values starting from 102 or from 101. So I will give this rule the precedence of 501. So this rule in this case should be processed at the end. So this will be the last rule that will be applied to objects that are imported from the local Active Directory. Then we click next, and here under scope we can simply add a clause. And the attributes, as I told you, it should be extension attribute 15 equals and no sync. Okay, so this is the scope. So this rule will apply only to users that have a value for the extension attribute 15 set to no sync. Then we will hit next. On join rules, we don't have to specify anything. And on transformation, here is basically where we will filter this. We will have to choose this float type to constant, and here the cloud filtered attribute, and we set this attribute to true, and simply click add rule. And now the rule was added. Now let's run a synchronization. And again, an initial synchronization, because we didn't perform any changes on the user objects in the local Active Directory. And let's see what's happening. Let's wait a few seconds so we have a full import. We see already here that we have a filtered object, but in this case we cannot access the object exactly, so we don't know exactly what that object is. But we know that that object will get filtered. Okay. Again, export. And let's wait for a few seconds to see what's happening. Here we see deletes because this user was there first, was in the cloud. And now it's John Steinbeck. We see that John S at danpatrashko.com is the user principal name. So this user was synchronized to Azure AD, but since this user had the extension attribute set to no sync, it was simply deleted. Here you can see the extension attribute is set to no sync. It was filtered out from the synchronization, so it was deleted from Azure Active Directory also. So we can close it. Now, of course, we know exactly, or I knew exactly, that this type of user or this specific user will be deleted when I create this new rule. But however, there are a lot, and I had this type of problems also last week with partners that I discussed, and how to troubleshoot this is that you don't know exactly. Maybe somebody applies a new rule, or maybe you change something to a user, you change an attribute without knowing exactly that somebody, let's say, also added this type of attribute-based filter to Azure AD Connect. So what we can do here is we can search for this user. So what we'll see, for example, as information that you will receive as an admin, why is that user not synchronized? So this user is not syncing, we have a problem, and so on. Then you go here in the metaverse search, you look for that user principal name that you know that user has, and you will search for it. Because when you search for it, you will also find something, and when you click on the result, you will see under connectors that this user is only present in only in this local AD connector, but is not present also in the Azure Active Directory connector. And this is a first clue that this object type is being filtered. Now, the next thing is you can double click here, and here you will say that you will see, or no, you won't see it here, basically. Okay. So this is the user, how it is it is imported from Azure AD. But what you will be able to see here under properties, just one second, here You can see here that this extension attributes is set to no sync, and this is why this specific user is not synchronizing at all. So very important, what you can do always when you have this type of information that okay, a user is not synchronized, and maybe you also got information the user was synchronized until yesterday or until the day before, and right now the user is not in the cloud anymore. Then you can go and check in this database to see that user, and if you see that there is only one connector here, then it means that the user is filtered. However, here under the list of attributes, you will see also the information that cloud filtered is set to true. And this is the 100% clue that this user is setting a customized attributes-based filtering rule. So then you have check also with your colleagues to know exactly what rules are there applied, and also to check the rules exactly what rules do we have here, and you would need to find exactly out against which rule this user is hitting so that it is not synchronized to Azure AD anymore. Okay, so this is how we can implement attribute-based filtering, and how we can check if a user was filtered or not. Now, the last thing that I would like to cover here is outbound, because I have, for example, a user that that I want to not synchronize with his user principal name, but I want that he's on premises, so in the local Active Directory, his email address would be or would become the user principal name in Azure Active Directory. So in this case, I will go on the outbound, as I told you right when we started to talk about synchronization rules, that if we want to apply a transformation rule, then please apply it on the outbound connector. And we will name it, okay, let's say map UPN from mail, and let's use the same description here because we are running short on time. Okay, then the connected system, again in this case we want to apply the rule when this user is exported to Azure AD, so in this case we will click here on the Azure AD connector. Then the connected system object type is still user, and the metaverse user type is still person. Then once again, we want only to update the user, not to provision him once again. So we will check here the join one, and the precedence, I want this rule, for example, to be the first rule that that should be applied, and let's make it 50. And now it's really basically almost the same thing like as we did with the attribute-based filtering. But here, for example, we can define that department. So if the department equals finance, so this will apply then for all users that have set a value for department as finance. Let's click next, and then no join rules, and under transformation we add the transformation and direct and target attribute. So the target attribute is Azure AD. In this case, we want this target attribute to be a user principal name, and we want the source attribute to be the email address. So I don't recall exactly if it's listed here under email or under mail. I think it's under mail. Yes, it's under mail. And so in this case, we have decided that if the certain user is has a value for department set to finance, then in that case, please, when you synchronize the user, use the email attribute and set it in Azure AD as the user principal name. So I would simply like to add here. Click add, and let me briefly check in Active Directory. I think that I have this user that okay, has department finance, correct? and has the mail wilson at thisdomain.com. And here on premises, it has the UPN wilson at danpasarsko.com. And just to make sure that everything will run correctly, get MSOL user. So this is against Azure Active Directory. And the user principal, because right now the user is synchronized with his UPN, and it is okay. It should be there. Yes, you can see here the user principal name is like that. And now what we will do once this rule will apply, what will happen is that now the value for mail will become the user principal name in Azure AD. So let's close this, and once again, let's run a full synchronization, because once again, we haven't changed anything to this user in the local Active Directory. So let's run a full synchronization again, and let's see what's happening. Because right now, after everything is done, I would simply expect that the UPN for this user will change from what we had previously, which is described here, this UPN, that it will match the email address. Just a few seconds more, and then we should be able to see exactly the result. Let's wait for the export process to finalize, or the export run profile, as I told you that it's called technically, and see exactly what's happening. So, okay, we have an update. If we click here, we can see, yes, this is the user, and yes, you can see user principal name, old value, and new value. And just to make it sure, let's run this command let again against Azure Active Directory. Of course, I will get this type of error message because the user is not found. But if I will change here to this one, we can find the user. So this was an example on how we can implement a transformation rule. As said, always please implement transformation rules on the outbound rules and apply filtering rules on the inbound rules set. So this is very, very important. Good. This being said, I know it took a little bit longer as expected, but that's what I wanted to show you today. I hope this was some useful information for you, and I hope really that right now you are able to understand a little bit better how Azure AD Connect works, how we can do filtering, how we can customize synchronization intervals, how we can, for example, what's the difference between delta synchronization and a full synchronization, and so on. Now let me briefly add once again this this slide deck, because I want to wrap up this session right now. Here on this slide, you can see a list of all 8 webcasts in the Office 365 Lab series that we have planned for September. And you are able to go here and to register for all of these webcasts. All of these webcasts are also posted with the respective registration link on our Office 365 Labs blog on TechNet. You can search it with your favorite browser, and I'm sure if you search after Office 365 Labs, you will find it right in the first results. And however, these are the resources, the community channels where we are present and where we are here to listen to your feedback. So please let us know, did you enjoy this webcast, or if you didn't enjoy, why you didn't enjoy, what could we do better to improve, and also let us know maybe what type of things would you like to expect in further webcasts. So for example, let us know if you want to focus more on certain Office 365 services, or on certain features from different Office 365 services. Just simply let us know exactly what you would expect, what would be useful for you, and I can't promise you 100% that we will do those webcasts, but if there are a lot of you that suggest that we should speak about a certain topic, I'm sure that we will find a way in order to set that up so that we can simply deliver it to you. Now, this being said, I would like to really thank you very much for being part of this webcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was for you with very fresh information, and I hope you will be able to apply all these things right away once you got to work once again with Office 365. Once again, thank you very much, and hopefully I would see you next time in the webcast regarding Office 365 Exchange Line mail flow. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye.